Hello and welcome to Beyond GDP, the Social Progress podcast, where we're looking at all the different aspects of how to build an economic system that works for people and planet. And if we think of one country in the world that seems to be doing that, I think a lot of us think of Costa Rica. It's a country that's famous for its environmental record, and certainly in terms of the Social Progress Index, it's a pretty standout performer. Costa Rica has a level of social progress almost the same as the United States, a country that is 3 times richer. So Costa Rica seems to be a country that's doing a really good job of turning its economic strength into social progress outcomes and doing so pretty sustainably. So the theme of today's podcast is, what is Costa Rica's secret sauce? And who better to talk with me about that is Jaime Garcia. Jaime works at the Inkai Business School in Costa Rica. I think you've adopted Costa Rica as your country, Jaime. You're originally Mexican, but you're now a Costa Rican citizen. So you've got a bit of a balance of being an insider, but also dispassionate. Jaime is a terrific researcher. He's also a social innovator. He's also a bit of a media star in Latin America. And we've worked closely together on a host of projects for nearly a dozen years. Jaime, welcome to Beyond GDP.
Michael, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
It's great to be with you, Jaime. And what's the answer? What is Costa Rica's secret sauce? What's it doing right?
Well, I don't know if you remember, but the first time when we presented Costa Rica outcomes in 2014, we saw that Costa Rica was the overperformer in terms of SPI and GDP, just as you mentioned. But I don't know if you remember that also in that year, a journalist from Financial Times, Simon Cooper, came to Costa Rica to try to learn what's happening in this country and why they are having this performance in SPI. And one of the things that he wrote about it is that this society was founded by fairly equal small farmers that believe in mutual support. That was like the key concept that he put in that text, trying to explain why Costa Rica is our performer. Now, when you look into what the journalist found in those trips that he did in the country, actually, it's practically impossible to not think about the text of Darren Acemoglu and Robinson, Why Nations Fail. And this is the magic of using data and then understand the context to have a big picture of what's happening in a country. And when you see that, you find that Costa Rica's level of social progress and performance beyond GDP is not a short-term story. Actually, it's part of the DNA of the country because you see that, for example, Costa Rica is started to think about elementary education compulsory for boys and girls since the end of 19th century. In Latin America, was almost a great innovation. The other thing, for example, San Jose was one of the first cities in the region with public electric lighting at the end of 19th century. Practically was the second or the third one in the region, including United States. So in that way, Costa Rica has always been a social innovator since 19th century. And of course, in the second half of the 20th century, they also make a big leap in terms of social welfare by the abolition of the army in 1948. And that changed the trajectory of development of Costa Rica. So if you ask me about what is the secret ingredient behind this success of Costa Rica, I think that the main thing here was having institutions that help us, that help Costa Ricans to create incentives for participation, for innovation, and for an inclusive economic growth.
So, I mean, let's look at that comparison to some other countries. So, Costa Rica is essentially at its sort of in the 19th century, a country of small farmers. It's quite a poor country. It hasn't got the big landed estates of other countries of Latin America. And this is what then drives a sort of civic culture. Is that what's happening?
Yes, exactly. And this is very well presented by Acemoglu and Robinson. And actually, they contrast Costa Rica against Guatemala, the other big country in terms of population and total GDP in the region, practically with the same history in terms of being part of the Spaniard Imperium. But they mention, look, when they start to develop in institutions, the social arrangement in at the beginning of the 19th century uh, helped to develop very different institutions in terms of how were developed, but also in terms of incentives and the outcomes of those institutions. So Guatemala had big extraction industry, agriculture, mining. Uh, on the other side, Costa Rica, they were small farmers, coffee farmers, uh, pineapple farmers, etc. Very small entrepreneurs, if you want to use modern language. And the way they organized were very different because in Guatemala, they were looking for institutions to protect the extractive industries. So at the end, you had extractive institutions that focus more on protect the elites, on protect the concentration of power in these elites, and also restraining the innovation and social mobility. In Costa Rica, what happened is, hey, we are very small, we are poor, we need to work together in order to generate better outcomes as a society. And they start looking first for incentives to securing private property rights, encouraging investments in new technologies and skills in order to increase their production capabilities, and also the power distribution, because they were practically all the same, it was more pluralistic. So that helped them to take better decisions in order to adopt technologies, in order also to generate better institutions that allow them to have more inclusiveness and economic growth. And actually, Michael, you can see that in our data, because when you see the scorecard of the social progress index in Costa Rica, you will see that they are doing it very well in rights and voice, which is this dimension that helps us to measure institution quality, and they are ranked 21st in the world. So I like to think that given the story of Costa Rica, we are still able to track the evolution of those institutions since 19th century to 21st century.
And that's a very interesting point, because I think when we built the social progress index framework originally, I think a lot of us thought of it in sort of a Maslowian way, that there was, you do the basic needs, then you do the foundations of well-being, and the rights would come at the end. And I think what Costa Rica demonstrates is how a country can put the rights and freedoms at the beginning, and that then becomes an engine for future progress that follows afterwards. Would that be a fair description?
I think so, Michael. And actually, it's very good that you mentioned that because I don't like that approach of this pyramid because I think that actually our framework is a better representation not only about what Acemoglu and Robinson uh, wrote, but also about Amartya Sen. Actually, well, our dimension of opportunities is based on Amartya Sen research. But Amartya Sen said, hey, if you invest in personal rights, in freedom and inclusiveness, actually you're going to have better outcomes in education, in health. He, of course, explained it in the Indian context in Kerala. But when you see examples like the Costa Rican one, then you start understanding that Amartya Sen is right in terms of the capabilities and freedoms and how the institutional arrangements also are affecting the way nutrition and basic human needs are actually performing in the countries.
And that then, I mean, it makes it interesting if you're looking at country performance. If you've got some countries that are looking currently economically dynamic, maybe making progress on some of the basic needs aspects of social progress, but are going backwards on rights, then actually that could be a leading indicator of trouble to come elsewhere. Or conversely, you might have other countries that might be struggling in some areas, but because they're maintaining a strong position on rights, that actually is a positive indicator for the future. I mean, it's somewhere like South Africa. South Africa is probably one of the most skewed scorecards, where relative to its GDP, it does quite poorly on basic needs because it's still catching up on that apartheid legacy, but it still does pretty well on rights and freedoms because of the constitutional framework it set up. And perhaps, although South Africa has plenty of problems, if it can maintain those rights and freedoms, it's well set for the future, perhaps. And we can look at it that way around.
Exactly. And here, Michael, I think that part of the secret of Costa Rica, beside the institutions, also is this bias about education and health. They focus a lot in basic education in 19th century, at the beginning of the 20th century, and also in health. Practically is one of the first universal health systems in Latin America. The Caja Costarricense de Seguro Social was founded in 1948, just with the money that the state saved from the abolition of the army. So they had a common vision in those years in order to invest in human capital. And with the combination of personal rights or institutional arrangements that allowed investment and private property rights, also the investment in human capital helped them to generate this virtual circle of having more social welfare at the same time that you are having the resources to invest in that social welfare. So I think that is what in some countries is lagging, or there is a gap. Maybe we can have very good scores in personal rights, in freedom, inclusiveness, but they still need to invest in health and education. And I think that Costa Rica did the right decision in the middle of the 20th century. That helped them to attract high technology investments at the same time that they were increasing their social progress.
So Costa Rica, great track record through the 19th, 20th centuries. Let's talk about the 21st century, because there's a slight sense from our data that suggests that Costa Rica stalled a bit. I think it was sort of its ranking hasn't really changed in the last 15 years. You know, a lot of the aspects of social progress actually haven't progressed much in the last 15 years. I think advanced education's improved, access to information's improved, but not much else. Costa Rica is now a high-income country. Congratulations. But is Costa Rica now at sort of is it a bit stalled at the moment, or is it an inflection point?
Well, when you see the data, you see that there are some indicators that are keeping the trend, but others are things that are going into an inflection point, especially, for example, personal safety, advanced education. And this is part of a regional change of the context in terms of narcotraffic, in terms of how the countries are collaborating or not collaborating in personal safety. This stuff changed a lot during the pandemic and after the pandemic. I think it's part of the impacts that are going beyond just health, but are affecting other dimensions and components of social progress. And on the other side, Costa Rica has been very efficient to generate this social welfare, but where they have the low-hanging fruit in the middle of the country, in the metropolitan area. Because when we measure the social progress index at cantonal level, what we are seeing are practically two Costa Ricas. The first one is the one that we mentioned at the beginning, is very good, transforming economic growth into social progress. It's the place where they are developing technological clusters like the medical devices. Is where Intel has invested in their production and research. But when you go to the coast or the borders, you see a decrease in social progress. And I think that is part of what is challenging the success of Costa Rica. We were very efficient to put social progress in the metropolitan area, but we are failing in terms of developing better schools, better health clinics, better opportunities in the other Costa Rica, in the coast and in the borders. So I think that part of the challenge is for the next century or for the next years, because we're going to have presidential elections, is how to increase social progress in those areas in the other Costa Rica.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I think if we looked at another data set we've got for the EU Regional Social Progress Index, what we see is the countries that are the best performers, like Sweden and Finland and Denmark, what they've done really well is equalize social progress performance across the country. They don't have big differences between richer and poor regions. Whereas other countries can be doing well, whether it's France or Germany, or more extremely sort of Italy, you've got very big dispersions. So it's almost that equalizing social progress across the space of a country is the kind of, that's the Premier League challenge for social progress to really push on to that top tier. What are the lessons that Costa Rica offers for other countries?
Well, I would mention actually the five main messages that Costa Rica used to attract investments. And I always repeat this to every country that I go, because they seem very obvious. But actually, when you see the data and the strategy and the history behind this, it makes a lot of sense. And even though they are very straightforward, they are very difficult to implement. The first one is human talent and social progress. We need to see human talent as the leverage that can help us to increase social progress. Secondly, political and legal stability. In a world where polarization is practically everywhere, more than ever, political and legal stability is very important to attract investments, to generate more innovations. Third one, economic stability and incentives well aligned with increasing economic growth. We need economic growth to increase social progress. That's a fact. But after coming from years like the pandemic one, with high levels of inflation, high levels of debt, more than ever again, economic stability is a must. The fourth one, I think, is proximity to big markets. I know that we are now in a global context where globalization maybe is going backwards, but still we need foreign trade to sell our services, to sell our products, and increase our capability of consumption. So we need to put that in this recipe. And finally, commitment to sustainability. The green part of Costa Rica is not only on the nature, but it's also in how we relate with the nature, not only to conserve it, but to use it to generate better solutions in terms of social progress, in terms of economic growth, and in terms of protect the environment and use it also as part of the recipe behind what I call it the Pura Vida formula, if you think in that way. And if you try to replicate this, I think you are going to have success in practically everywhere.
That's great. So I think one lesson I would take from Costa Rica, which is not really actionable, is being small is actually quite helpful. I think in general we see that smaller countries do better than bigger countries, because I think the smallness can help with some of that unity and trust and cohesion. But the points you're making, I think, really are sort of point to what any country can do around putting sustainability at the core of your strategy. It's an investment in not just in your planet, but in your people, and also in your competitiveness. It's part of your competitiveness. The investment in people is critical, and that pays off in the long term. You've got to keep investing in that. And also that point about political stability. And you've got to wonder what's going to happen with countries that are going through periods of, political turbulence. They may be successful now, but at what point is that going to be a cost to them that's going to hit them economically, because it's undermining that trust and confidence going forward. So I think Costa Rica, we've got some presidential election coming up next year, and some decisions to make, and also some threats, as you said, about the narco gangs and some of the changing geopolitics of Central America. Are some threats and risks as well. Jaime, give me a prediction. It doesn't matter what it's about. It could be about Costa Rica. It could be about Mexico. It could be about football. I just put your money where your mouth is and give me a prediction for the year ahead.
Well, I think that it's easier thinking about football. Mexico is going to make it for the next round of the World Cup, and just like that, Costa Rica, we don't know if we are going to make it to the championship. But in terms of social progress and Costa Rica, I still believe that it doesn't matter who is in the presidency, because we still have like some consensus of what kind of Costa Rica we want. There are some challenges there in terms of polarization, education, security, but still in Costa Rica we can see that there is some common idea that maybe in other countries, because they are bigger countries, is more difficult. But here, I think that the worst case scenario is just keep the trend, and I'm not expecting something very different from the history of what's happening. Maybe it's not what we need, but I think that if things are good, maybe we can renew our social contract for the digital and climate era, keeping institutions inclusive while pushing economic growth. That's the best case scenario. Let's see what happens. But for me, are those two. And I also have go and check to the data. And we have the historical SPI. And sometimes the best way to look for the future is to look in the past, just as Moglu and Robinson did it. But now with our historical data, I can see that in 1990, actually there were another country with the same social progress as Costa Rica, South Korea. They had practically the same score. And the difference in income was only $3,000 per capita. Korea higher than Costa Rica. But at the end of the historical series, we can see that Korea is a tier one country with more than 10 points of difference with Costa Rica in social progress, and more than $20,000 in GDP per capita. So what I want is to see what happened with Korea in those years and what we can translate into Costa Rica in order to move Costa Rica to the place that now has South Korea. So I think that maybe we can learn something and adapt it to the new technologies and world. But I think that is the power of the data. We can see what worked and how we can replicate it.
It's a great one to point to. I think, you go back 40 years and people were talking of South Korea as being a developing country, even then. And this acceleration, this great success. I think we need to have what is South Korea's secret sauce episode as well. What's been the success there? I'm going to make, based on what you've said, given the best case scenario, I think I'm going to make the bold prediction that by 2030, I think Costa Rica is going to overtake the United States on social progress. So check me out there in 2030 on that one. Jaime Garcia, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing all this insight about Costa Rica. And I think there are real takeaways that other countries should be looking to. And I think especially as people's belief in rights and freedoms is perhaps wavering in countries in the world around the world, and we see that being set back. I think the critical part of that for ensuring long-term social and economic success is a really important reminder from Costa Rica's story. So, Jaime, thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. It was a pleasure.